Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. So it's really awesome to be back here again at Khalsa Camp, and it's nice to see so many familiar faces. We're going to be doing two talks today on Asakivad. The first one is a smaller one. It's going to be an introduction, and then we're going to be talking about the themes that Guru Nanak Sahib Ji and Guru Angad Sahib Ji talk about in Asakivad. So before we begin, let's just remember that I've used images of the Gurus, but they were painted a long time after the Gurus lived, and they're not accurate. So they're just a teaching tool. You know, in this painting we can see Guru Nanak Sahib Ji with Bhai Mardana in discussion with some Muslim scholars. But of course we don't know what Guru Sahib Ji really looked like. It's just so we can get an idea and help us visualize things while we're learning. Okay? So let's begin. First with just the basics about Asakivad. So Asakivad is made up of 24 pauris of Guru Nanak Sahib Ji, and it has sloks added to the pauris. There's 59 sloks altogether, 44 by Guru Nanak, and 15 are by Guru Angad Sahib Ji. So the vast majority of Asakivad is written or revealed by Guru Nanak Sahib Ji, with some of it by Guru Angad Sahib Ji. And we're going to go through what all these different words mean. So if you don't understand why it's created like this, we're going to talk about that in a second, so don't worry. And when we sing Asakivad, we also added the chants of Guru Ram Das Sahib Ji, who's the fourth Nanak, right? And those chants are found in Asakivad, in Asarag as well, okay? So it appears in Anang 462 of Guru Granth Sahib Ji. So before we begin, just because this sometimes becomes a question, it's not a big deal. And I don't think it's a big issue if you say Asadivad or Asakivad, but you'll notice that I'll say Asakivad and that's what it's officially been written as. And so this is a reason why, just if you're interested in the logic. The other Vars in Guru Granth Sahib Ji, they are given always a title Ki. So Jetsari Kivad, Ramkali Kivad, Sira Kivad, for example, or Basant Kivad, for example. In Guru Granth Sahib Ji, Asakivad doesn't have a title. But in the Tatkara, it is given the title Asakivad, or here you can see an old Tatkara. Tatkara, for those that you don't know, is a table of contents. So this is an old Tatkara of Guru Granth Sahib Ji from the 1800s, and here we can see it says Var, Asa Ki Malla Pella. Then it says Apine Aap Sajyo. Okay? The first line, right? So we can see that we say Ki, and saying D is more of a modern Punjabi phenomenon. Ki is what Sikhs used to say. For example, we say Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, right? We say Guru Ke Langar. So we don't say D or Da or De. So that's just a small point. It's not really a big deal. And if someone says Asadivad, I don't think we need to argue with them or make a fight about it, okay? So let's start right away with what is a Var. So has anybody ever heard of Vars outside of Sikhi? So Vars are actually an old tradition. And here we can see two South Indian or I think maybe Central Indian musicians, and they are singing folk music. And that's what Vars were. They were folk music. So they were stories that people would sing, and they would usually be about warriors and kings, or they would be romantic stories, like Hiranja, for example. And so these Vars would talk about stories about famous kings, about famous battles. And nowadays, if we want to be entertained, we have our phones, we have computers, we have TV, right? So we can watch a movie or watch a show or watch a YouTube clip anytime we want. But back in the day, 500-600 years ago, if you wanted to be entertained, there was nothing. There was no visual media. You literally had to pay musicians to tell you stories, or you had to go to plays, and people put on small plays. And they would come around to different villages, and they would put on a performance for you. And so Vars, these were traveling musicians, the Tandis, who were the people who would sing the Vars. They would go around to different villages and they would sing, and the people would give them money. And that's essentially what this music was. So you can understand that Vars are really folk music. And folk music means that it's music of the people. It's music that everyone around Punjab, for example, would have known. So when they show up, people would sing along. They would be entertained. And they would have their favorite daddies. They'd say, this guy sings really well. We love the way he does it. You know, it was sort of the way that we look up to singers now. So what the Guru Sahibs did was they created a unique Sikh culture, but they did not create a unique Sikh culture out of ashes. They took the culture that was around them and they transformed it. This is something that we can think about living in Western culture today. So the Gurus didn't reject Indian culture. They took Indian culture and they made it Sikh. So they took classical styles of music and they incorporated it into Guru Granth Sahib Ji and Gurbat Sangeet traditions, right? In the same way, they took folk styles of music, like Baba Nakli or Bada Ma or Vad, or all these other folk traditions, and they composed Bani in those traditions. And the really amazing idea about this, think about it, if you hear something to the tune and the style of music that you're already used to listening, that you already like, it's so much easier to engage with it. So that's what the Gurus were doing. They were using the music that people were comfortable with, that they knew, and they were transforming it. So whereas old bars used to be about fighting and battles, the bars in Guru Granth Sahib Ji are instead about transforming yourself, fighting your Kam, Krodh, Lobh, Moh, Ahankar, for example. So it became something much bigger. Whereas old bars were about battles between two forces, Guru Sahib Ji created bars that were about one thing, Akal Purkh Vaheguru. So they took these traditions and they transformed them. So in Guru Granth Sahib Ji there are 22 bars. Bhai Gurdas Ji, who I think those of you who don't know, Bhai Gurdas Ji is a very important Sikh in Sikh history. He's the one who wrote down the original copy of Guru Granth Sahib Ji. He's considered the first Jathedar of Akal Takht. He's the one who taught Guru Arjan and Guru Hargobind Sahib Ji how to read and write. And he was, his Bani, the writings that he wrote, are considered acceptable to sing as Kirtan in Gurdwara or to do Bhatt. So even though they're not in Guru Granth Sahib Ji, we can sing them and we do Bhatt, his Bani. And so he has, besides his, what we call Savaiye, he also composed 40 bars. And there's one Vad of Guru Gobind Singh Ji as well. Does anyone know what that Vad is called? Chandivar. But what's his proper title? Because remember the Varsi Bhagwati Ji Ki Vad, right? So Varsi Bhagwati Ji Ki, which we use every day when we do what? Ardas, right? So we read the first body of Varsi Bhagwati Ji Ki every day, or Chandidi Vad, okay? So that's the one Vad of Guru Gobind Singh Ji that appears in Dasabani. So these are the 22, so bars are pretty common in Guru Granth Sahib Ji. Does anyone know, for example, what the shortest Vad is in Guru Granth Sahib Ji? Basant Ki Vad. How many bodies does it have? 3. Okay. So let's talk about bodies now. Does anyone know what the word body means? Literally. Step? Okay. So it means a step. So in this Shabad, it's a very famous Shabad. It's a Shabad that Guru Arjan Sahib Ji sang when he was being tortured, right? We've all heard the line. Tera kiya, mitha lage, har naam padarat, nanak mange, right? So Guru Arjan Sahib Ji, this small Shabad, how many 40s does it have? Who said 3? So it actually has 2 40s. So the way you can tell is this number right there. Do you see that number? That's 2. So this is a Rahau. The Rahau is the theme of the Shabad. The Rahau does not count towards the numbering of the 40s. Okay? They're just good things to know how Guru Granth Sahib Ji is organized. So this is a Shabad, what we would call the sorry, what's the word? Dopade. It's a 2-line Shabad. Okay? It has 140 here and 140 here, and then the Rahau in the middle. So we don't need to worry about these other numbers right now. If you're interested, we can talk about them later. So 40s are literally steps, and they're what we would call in English stanzas of a poem or a song, okay? Slok literally means when you're praising somebody, that's a slok. But in poetry, slok refers to a couplet. So a couplet is a 2-line poem, okay? So these are very famous sloks of Guru Tegh Bahadur Sahib Ji, right? Which I'm sure a lot of us have heard when they do Samafti of an Akhand Path, right? We read the Slok Malanova and then you do the end of Guru Granth Sahib Ji, right? So Slok Malanova is composed up of 55, I think. Is that right? 56, sorry. Sorry, 57, okay. 57 sloks of Guru Tegh Bahadur Sahib Ji. But lots of sloks are longer or shorter. So this is really key. The Gurus don't care about rules. In every situation, they don't care about rules. Guruji is, where is Bani coming from first of all? Galpur. It's divinely inspired. Guruji is not sitting there writing Bani like we would write a letter out. He's not going, okay, what should the next line be? What rhymes with this word? That's not how Bani is revealed. Bani is divinely inspired straight from a Galpur Kavaigu. So when the idea is done that Shabad needs to tell, that's when the Shabad is over. So some slokas can go on for quite long. For example, we read a slok at the end of Japji Sahib every day, right? Which is a lot longer than 2 lines, right? Pavan Guru Panipata, right? So slokas don't have to be 2 lines, and you'll see that in Asakivad a lot. Some slokas are very long and some are shorter. Sometimes you have 1-line slokas. There's a famous one in Guru Nanak Sahib Ji's Bani, Lahore Sher Zer Kher Saba Per. It's 1-line slok, that's all it is. So you can have slokas that are many lines or 1 line. The Guru doesn't care about rules that much. And sometimes, for those of you who do Sej Part or read Guru Granth Sahib Ji, you'll notice, for example, Ashpadis, right? Now, an Ashpadi is an 8-line Shabad, but sometimes you'll come across Ashpadis right at the beginning of Guru Granth Sahib Ji, for example, in Siddhi Rag, that are 24 lines or 16 lines long, you know? So, even though it means coupled, it can be longer. So here is what a var would have originally been. When Guru Nanak Sahib Ji created Asakivad, it would have been only the pauris. Okay? And so here are the first 3 pauris of Asakivad that we all know. It starts with Apine Apsadyo, Apine Rakyo Now. And the third one is Apino Pog Pog Ke Hoi Pasmar Por Sadaya, right? So we can see here that these 3 pauris, when Guru Nanak Sahib Ji first revealed Asakivad, would have just been the pauris. This is a contemporary painting of Guru Arjan Sahib Ji dictating to Bhai Gurdas Ji, Guru Granth Sahib Ji. Which happened actually not on the banks of Amritsar Sarovar, it happened on the banks of Ramsar. If anyone's been to Amritsar, Ramsar is another Sarovar in Amritsar. But anyways, Guru Arjan Sahib Ji took the slokas of the early Gurus. So the early Gurus revealed a whole bunch of slokas. Guruji took those slokas and he added them to each of these pauris to make up a var. Okay? So just to break it down for you, because when we use these terms and you're not familiar, it can be a little bit confusing. Originally it would have just been the pauri, right here. And then Guru Arjan Sahib Ji added these 3 slokas of Guru Nanak and Guru Angad. Okay? So for example, this is now the first part of Asakivad, made up of these 3 slokas, one by Guru Nanak, another by Guru Angad, then one more by Guru Nanak Sahib Ji, and then the pauri of Guru Nanak. Okay? The reason why it doesn't say Malla Pella here is because in the title it already said Malla Pella. So whoever's name comes in the title, that person is that Guru is the one who wrote the whole var. So that you don't need to see the pauri again and again. Now when we sing Asakivad, here we have a painting from Kaltaka side that's now destroyed. This is Guru Ramdas Ji and Baba Buddha Ji making Guru Arjan Sahib Ji the next Guru. When we sing Asakivad, we add in the chants of Guru Ramdas Ji. So you guys know this. When you sing Asakivad, if you look at, when you're reading in Guru Granth Sahib Ji, it doesn't look the same as when we sing it. And the reason why it doesn't look the same as when we sing it, there's actually 2-3 seats up here if you guys want to come up. Don't be shy, come on. I'm going to keep saying it until you come up here. It's going to be so awkward.
They're kind of too close to the front right now.
Okay, there's 2 seats right here. There you go. Okay. So, a chant is, and you can ask questions, I know it's a lot of information. A chant is a sonnet. So how many lines is in a sonnet? So a chant is 16 lines. It's made up of 4 pauris, which have 4 lines in each pauri. Okay? So it's 16 lines of chant, and Guru Ramdas Sahib Ji revealed many chants in Guru Granth Sahib Ji. He's famous for his chants. And so when we sing Asakivad, we take, so here's one chant of Guru Ramdas Sahib Ji, for example. Okay? So Asa Malla Chotha Chant Kar Chotha Har Amrit Pinne Loena Man Pren Ratanna Ram Radhe, right? So this is the first one that we sing at the beginning of Asa Ki Baat. So when it appears in Guru Granth Sahib Ji, it has 4 pauris in it. Do you see that? So we don't know when this happened. So this is one of those mysteries of Sikh history. At some point in Sikh history, it became a tradition to take these chants and break them up pauri by pauri and add them to each section of Asa Ki Baat when you sing it. Some people believe it started during the time of Guru Arjan, but we can't say for certain, we don't have the history of it. But it's a Pantic tradition. This is what we do when we sing Asa Ki Baat, this is how we do it. You sing first the chant, then you read out the sloks, then you sing the pauri together. And then what happens after you sing the pauri? Then you read the pauri again one more time, right? So that's how we do Asa Ki Baat. So Taran Singh was telling me something very interesting. Do you want to quickly tell people why we read out the pauri at the end?
Sure. Pauris traditionally get louder and louder in Vars, and so the tabla gets louder and louder traditionally. And so what ends up happening is words get lost in the sound of the tabla. And so usually the person on the tabla or on the jodi is usually the one that repeats the pauri. And that's so so you can actually understand them again. And then the other purpose is that Guru Sahib doesn't want just the person on the string instrument or on the harmonium to be the one singing the shabad or be aware of the shabad. He wants the one on the jodi or the tabla to also be aware of the shabad. So that's why he's the one that repeats it, because it's important for everybody to be able to connect with the shabad.
So the tabla, he or she also reads after. And the point made is that Var, remember what the tradition of Vars are. They were warrior songs. They were these epic, they were essentially comic books in song form. Like the way that we watch Avengers now, or Batman, these sort of exciting stories about good versus evil. That's what Vars were for people in India back in the Middle Ages. And so they would get more and more exciting until they reached the final battle, which would be like the last 40, right? So the tabla gets louder and louder, so that's the way that it's sung. So here, this chant, which has 4 pauris, you guys can see the numbers. There's 1, 2, right, 3, and then 4. So what do we call it, each section when we're singing it? Chakka, right? So it's made up of a pauri that Guru Arjan Sahib Ji added the sloks to, and then through Pantic tradition, we add a pauri of the chant. And that is what Asa Ki Baat is today. Okay? Anybody have any questions about that? So, Tunde Asraji Ki Tuni. This appears also in at the beginning of Asa Ki Baat. In 8 or 9 Vars of Guru Granth Sahib Ji, I think it's 9, there are old Vars, songs, ballads, that Guru Sahib Ji has said that you need to sing this Var to that tune. Now, it's really sad to say, but we have lost all those tunes. So we don't know what those original tunes were. We didn't keep that tradition up. And it was probably lost either in the 1700s when we were being killed in big numbers, or during the British time period when we lost a lot of our traditions. But we lost what those original tunes were. But Guru Sahib Ji, and some people say that Guru Hargobind Sahib Ji added this into Guru Granth Sahib Ji, though it's hard to say. But that's a nice idea that Guru Hargobind Sahib Ji had a hand in it. That these were added to certain Vars. And in Asa Ki Var, the tune that we're supposed to sing it to is Tunde Asraji Ki Tuni. So I want to just, everything that the Gurus do has a purpose and a meaning. And this is a beautiful thing about Sikhi. Is that, for example, I remember Pinder Pal Singh did his Kathan Ardas. How long was it?
80.
Sorry?
Like 80 days.
It's like 80 hours, right? So even Ardas, which is not Bani, except for the first part of it, has so much depth to it that you could do a lecture on each line by line. So Bani in and of itself has so much depth, so much that we can gain from it. And the levels of meaning that Guruji has put in it is pretty incredible. So we should learn why Guru Hargobind Sahib Ji or Guru Arjan Sahib Ji wanted us to sing Asa Ki Var to this tune. So we're going to tell you the story. I'm going to tell you the story really quickly about Asraja. Does anyone know the story about Asraja? Okay, so one person. So Asraja was a prince in a kingdom. His father's name was Sadak. His father's name was Sadak, and he had an older brother named Sardul. As was a younger son, and his father was an old man, and his wife, As's mother, had died a long time ago. So the father got remarried. After he got remarried, his new wife was very young, and she had mainly married him for his money and power. As was a really handsome, beautiful guy, and his mother, his stepmother, started hitting on him. And she wanted to have sex with him. As rejected her, and he said, "This is totally wrong, and I can't do this." So out of jealousy and anger, and also worry that As would tell his father, she went to her husband and said, "Your son tried to rape me." The father got so angry at his own son that he ordered that his son get executed. Now his prime minister, his Divan, was a good guy. And he knew that As, the prince, was actually a good guy as well. A very kind, gentle, religious person. And he knew that he would never do something like this. So he said, "I'll take care of the execution." So he took As out of the city into the jungle. And instead of cutting off As's head, he cut off his hand or his arm, depending on the version of the story. We can go over his hand, because I found a picture of this comic book character without a hand, okay? I couldn't find a picture at last, okay? It's not a very common story. So this guy's like from Thor comics or something? I don't know. That's what happens when you're making presentations. So As, instead of cutting off his head, he cut off his hand, and he took the hand back to the father and said, "Here, I killed him. Here's a proof." So As is lying there in the jungle. He's bleeding to death. Some merchants, some Banjare, walk by, and they see this poor guy. So they get him, they fix him up, and you think it's a nice part of the story, but it's not. After fixing him up, they take him to the next town, the next kingdom over, and they sell him into slavery. So As is now a slave, and his job is to wash clothes. But he's a very, very hard worker. And he gets up every morning at Amrit Villa, and he goes outside the city with all the master's clothes, the family's clothes, and he washes them in the river, which is outside the city walls. Now one day in this new kingdom where As is living, the king dies. But the king has no children and no brothers. So they don't know who to make the next king. So the ministers come up with a really ingenious solution. They go, whoever the next person is tomorrow morning, the first person to walk into the gates of the kingdom, the gates of the town, we will make that person the next king. So who's the first person up in the morning in the whole town? It's As. And as he's coming back into the kingdom, he's crowned the new king. He's an amazing king. The people love him. He's fair. He's honest. He doesn't use money. He gives back to the poor. So he's a great king. And a few years later, there's a terrible famine in that area. And so there's no crops. And the father's kingdom, where As was born, is falling apart because the father's not a good king. And he's old and he doesn't know what's going on. And they're running out of food. So he sends his minister to the next kingdom over. Now, As's kingdom has no problem with food because he made preparations. He had stored all this grain, and he's got plenty of food for all of his people. No one's starving there. The minister recognizes him, and he's amazed. He goes, "I thought, I cut off your hand. I didn't know what happened to you, and now you're a king." He's amazed at what's happened to As, that he's a Raja now, As Raja. And he then asks him, can we buy some grain from you? And As says, no, instead of buying it, your citizens are starving, I'll give it to you for free. So he gives them all this grain for free, and he takes it back. The minister goes back, he's really worried, but he tells the king the truth, the father the truth. And the father realizes his mistake. He realizes that his son wasn't the evil one, it was his wife. So he calls As back to his town, and he says, you are now, I want to make you king, and you'll be king of both towns. But As's older brother is jealous because he's the older son, he's supposed to be the next king. And him and his Jafja fight As, and they have a huge battle. And even though As only has one arm, he fights on the battlefield, and he slays his older brother, and he brings peace to both kingdoms. So what are the lessons that we can learn from the story of As? Why would Guruji have wanted us to sing Asa Ki Waar to this story? What are some of the themes that we get in there? What was As born as? He was born as a prince, right? But he became a slave. But in the end, what happened to him?
Became king.
King. So each one of us is born with potential to be Vaheguru-like. We have that within us. We, through our actions, accumulate all this mail, all this filth on us, right? But our true nature can't be hidden. We just need someone to find it for us, right? So there's that theme. There's a theme of truth over falsehood, of good over evil, like he was a good king. And there's also, interestingly, the idea of getting up in the morning, right? Because he only becomes king because he would get up in Amrit Vela. So that's also a theme of the story. So that's the story of Tunde Asraji Ki Tuni. And here is, we have some of the writings of some of these old, but we don't know the tunes of them, okay? Who here is good at singing like Tadi Vara and stuff? Anybody? Come on. Hanji?
ਹਾਂਜੀ
ਤੁਸੀਂ ਪੜ੍ਹ ਸਕਦੇ ਹੋ?
ਜਿਹੜੀ ਸਾਰੀ ਹੋਰ ਵਾਲੀ
ਹਾਂਜੀ, ਹੋਰ ਪੜ੍ਹ ਲਓ।
ਹਾਂਜੀ ਟੁੰਡੇ ਅਸਰਾਜੇ ਕੀ ਧੁਨੀ ਭਵ ਕਿਉ ਸ਼ੇਰ ਸਰਦੂਲ ਰਾਏ ਰਣ ਮਾਰੂ ਵਜੇ ਖਾਨ ਸੁਲਤਾਨ ਬੜ ਸੂਰਮੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਰਣ ਦੇ ਗੱਜੇ ਖਤ ਲਿਖੇ ਟੁੰਡੇ ਅਸਰਾਜ ਨੂੰ ਪਾਤਸ਼ਾਹੀ ਅੱਜੇ ਟੀਕਾ ਸਾਰੰਗ ਬਾਪ ਨੇ ਪਰ ਦਿੱਤਾ ਲੱਜੇ ਫਤਿਹ ਪਾਏ ਅਸਰਾਜ ਜੀ ਸਾਹੀ ਘਰ ਸੱਜੇ.
So here you can see the basic outline of the story here, right? That his father gave him the kingdom, that he got fateh, he won the victory. If you guys understand Punjabi, you can see that the story is told in this little excerpt of Tunde Asraji. So we can see that Asik Kivar that we use today is a work of many gurus. It is Guru Nanak Sahib Ji, Guru Angad Sahib Ji, the chants are from Guru Ramdas Ji, Guru Arjan Sahib Ji is the one who composed it all, and the Tunde Asraji Ki Tuni was added by, perhaps by Guru Hargobind Sahib Ji. And so this is a really beautiful idea. We know that the Gurus are one jot, and it's so amazing to see them working through time on one project. So Guru Granth Sahib Ji is really this project of, Guru Nanak Sahib Ji over 5 lifetimes, and then Guru Teg Bahadur, Guru Gobind Singh Ji. So it's really the work of all the Guru Sahibs of crafting it and creating it. So now that we've broken down, I want to go down through each section here. So first, Rag Asa. What does Rag mean? Does anybody explain to me what a Rag is?
It's a tune what it's supposed to be sung in.
Yeah, it's a tune, but it's not really a tune. It's hard to describe to a Western audience. For those of us who don't grow up with Gurmat Sangeet, and I'm not familiar with it very well either. Does anyone here do traditional Gurmat Sangeet Kirtan? Hanji.
It's a methodology, like it basically dictates which keys are pressed. So in the ascending and the descending tune, and so each rag has its particular key combinations.
Yes.
And so you can identify rags and then mood they elicit based on those key combinations.
So exactly. So you use a different set of key combinations, but within that, then you can improvise as long as you stay within those keys, and that's that rag. Okay. And each rag has its own theme and its own mood. And really amazingly, each rag has its own time of day that it's supposed to be sung at. So everything that Guruji does has so many layers of meaning. So when Guru Sahib is revealing a Shabad, even if you don't understand what it means, just by the tune of it, you can feel what Guruji is trying to get at. Just by the time of day of it, you can see what the Guruji is. So the Guru's Shabads, or the Bhagat Bani, works on so many different levels. It's really incredible. So Lag literally means a season, a time, or an environment, like a place. And it's a harmony. Now, whoops, let's go that. So what does Asa mean?
Hope.
Yeah, As means hope. So it literally means hope. It's the name of the rag. So a lot of people say, this is a common Punjabi idea, that doing Asa Ki War gets you what you want. Like people do it to get like their hopes and desires fulfilled. But we have to be careful with that type of thinking, because what are the types of hopes that we want to get from Guruji, right? So it's usually sung at the first ahead of the day, right? 3 to 6 a.m. or 4 to 7, depending on how you count. And As is also about making an effort, about working for your hope. And we talked about, so what does Vada mean? I have to check what was next. I said at the beginning, what's a Vad? It's a folk song, right? About ballad. What do you call it when you're fighting in a battle? When someone hits you, what's that called? It's a Vad. So that's where the word actually comes from. It's when you strike somebody, that's a Vad. So that's where the song came, because songs were about They were about fighting, they were about bars, right? So Var is a strike, it's a collection of pauris, and it's a folk song about honor and about romantic love. But Guru Sahib Ji took those old stories and they transformed them. And finally, pauri means step, right? So what you'll see is in Asakivad, we don't have time to go through it pauri by pauri, but hopefully this weekend will give you guys inspiration to really study and understand Asakivad. And we'll talk about how important it is. 4-6. Because each pauri builds on the idea of the last one. And it's like a pyramid. And so Guruji is building up to a final theme, and they start off with big ideas and then they get more focused as they go on. And all the Vars are like that, they have a central theme to them, just as any Bani does. And so when we study it, when we really become in tune with it, and it's not just studying, and we'll talk about that as well, because Guru Sahib Ji warns us against just studying things. It's about living it, feeling it, making it a part of yourself, then you'll understand the different levels of meaning. And finally, a slok is when you praise something. So just in the title here, we have so much about what Guruji is trying to tell us in Asakivad. That it is a battle that you need to fight to fulfill your wishes, to connect with Vaheguru. And you do it through the inspiration of stories like Trunde Asraji, where you are fighting against falsehood. So we're going to talk about what is falsehood or what is evil in Sikhi. We'll talk about that next. So just a quick brief, anyone know who Duni Chand was? Who here has heard of the story of Guru Nanak Sahib Ji giving the needle to the rich guy? So Guru Nanak Sahib Ji, he met a really rich guy, he was very, very wealthy, and the rich guy said, you know, give me something, Guruji, so that I can have mukti, so I can be saved. And Guruji gave him a needle. He said, you know, keep this needle, and, you know, and after you die, give it back to me in the next life, and that way you'll be guaranteed to, like, you know, reach Vaheguru. And when Dunichand went home and he showed his wife the needle, she started laughing at him. Because he wasn't very smart, but his wife, like most of our wives, was smarter than him. And she said, that was a joke for the married people. I thought Gurminder would laugh more, but is that, not enough of you guys are married, you don't get this humor. So the needle, you know, his wife laughed, she said, you can't take anything with you when you die. And so Dunichand went back to Guruji and he said, what are you tricking me? Why did you give me this needle? And Dunichand was famous. He had all these flags on his house. And Guruji had asked him, why do you have all these flags? And he says, each flag represents like a crore rupee that I've earned, or something of that nature, like huge amounts of money. So he would show off to everyone, this is how much money I made, like literally have flags flying in front of his house to show how much money he had. And Guruji said, if you can't even take one needle after you die, how are you going to take all this money? So that's the story of Dunichand. So according to all 6 traditions, the first 9 pauris of Asakivad, Guru Nanak Sahib Ji revealed them when he was talking to Sheikh Brahm, or Sheikh Ibrahim, who was the 12th or 13th descendant, not descendant, but a successor of Sheikh Farid. So Sheikh Farid's successor was a guy named Sheikh Ibrahim, who was called Sheikh Brahm, who Guru Nanak Sahib Ji met, and that's probably where Guru Nanak Sahib Ji got Sheikh Farid's Bani from, which is incorporated in Guru Granth Sahib Ji. And the last 15 pauris were with Dunichand in Lahore. But modern scholars like Professor Sahib Singh or Favir Singh and others believe that based on internal evidence that the pauris were all revealed at the same time. That they were, Guru Nanak Sahib Ji created them at once because they really flow as one big idea. It's not important, but just for those of you who are interested in the history. So how important is Asakivad? 4-6, Asakivad used to be considered Sangati Nitnem. That in your house in the morning you would do your Nitnem with your family, and then you would come together at the Gurukar and you would do Asakivad as a Sangat. And how old is this Maryada? This Maryada is one of the oldest traditions in Sikh history. It goes back to the time of Guru Nanak Sahib Ji at Kartarpur. So when you guys are doing Asakivad in the morning here at Khalsa camp, I want you to just take a moment and think, I'm doing something that my Guru started as a tradition 500, 600 years ago. That Guru Nanak Sahib Ji would sit among his Sikhs at Kartarpur and he would sing Asakivad with his Sikhs. And that's something that we are still keeping up that tradition. So Sikhs would do this every day. And Asakivad was so important that there's a famous story of Guru Gobind Singh Ji that as a battle was about to start, he instead stopped and sang Asakivar before he would fight the battle because it was time to do Asakivar. So that's how important Asakivar is to Sikh tradition. So Asakivar was really a way to start off your day. And that's why we want to look at the themes, because all the Banis in Nitnem have a very specific theme. You know, Savaya, for example, are really about talking about the futility of a lot of the religious things we do, and a lot of the material wealth that we have, you know? And Guru Gobind Singh Ji talking about how get rid of all that and instead fall in love with Vaheguru, for example, right? Chopay Sahib is about asking for protection from Vaheguru Sahib Ji, right? So each Bani has certain themes in it. Japji Sahib has many themes. It's a very philosophically deep Bani. Asakivar has also its own themes. And there's a reason why Guru Nanak Sahib Ji created this Maryada and asked us to do this every day. And for those of you who come to camps, for example, I love coming to the summer Khalsa camp because a week, I don't get to do Asakivar every morning, but a week of just doing it every morning and starting off your day with that in your mind, and then you hear the bodhis and the slokes through your mind all day. It's an incredible way to go through your day, you know? So here's a brief quote I just wanted to read of Professor Pooran Singh, who wrote really beautifully about Asakivar, and he writes in English in the 1920s, the famous Sikh poet. In Asakivar, Guru Nanak is seen busy destroying the strongholds of Brahminical superstition with a persistent determination. And lo, he has cleared the ruins away and built on their sites a towered and 1,000-pillar temple of song for all peoples and all nations of the earth to gather in and worship. Guru Nanak offers to the simple folk the cup of nectar, of Amrit, to taste. He puts a live song in the throats of those who sing it in the wild lips of prairie and jungle, gathered in great congregations. So what Buddhists are saying in a fancy way is that when you sing Asakivar, it's like you're taking Amrit. That's what Guru Nanak Sahib Ji is offering you. And when you're singing Asakivar, it doesn't matter where you are. It's like when you have that feeling when you're in a jungle or in the forest and we say, oh, it feels so nice and peaceful here. It feels like we're connected to Vaheguru. When you're in Asakivar, it doesn't matter where you are, that's how you feel. You're connected. And all those old traditions of all the other religions and things that weigh us down, superstitions, Guru Nanak Sahib is cleared that all away and created something totally unique that anyone in the world can take a part in. So that's the beauty of Asakivar. What time is it, Japnam Singh?
11:19.
11:19. So we have
45 minutes.
45 minutes? Okay, good. So if everyone just wants to stand up for a second, and stretch out, and we'll go on to the next presentation. You're not allowed to go anywhere. You can just stand up.
I know, Rick. Did you crack? Japra. Crack? Crack? Sorry.
I know how it feels.
Gonna get it fixed? Won't crack.
It's not working. It's not even working.
Phil. Phil. You didn't even care.
Okay, Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Come on. We're going to be an uncle at the camps. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. So, that was a lot of technical information. Some of you might find it interesting, some of you might find it a little bit boring. It's important to learn this though. And I want us to really think about that for a second before we go on, is that we are literally people who worship from an outside perspective. We don't like to call Guru Granth Sahib Ji a book, but literally a book, right? Guru Granth Sahib Ji is much more than that, right? It's Antar Jami, Puran Guru, right? But from an outside perspective, it's a book. And if we don't even know our own text, basics of Guru Granth Sahib Ji, like how it's organized, how it's composed, what's in it, and we don't connect with it, that's a very fundamental issue we have, you know? So we need to understand the basics of it, and that's very rudimentary. That type of basic information, that can't be your obsession. That's where you start off, and then you delve deeper into what Bani's really talking about, okay? So Asakivar, that was just going over the introduction and sort of a little bit of the history of Asakivar. Now we're going to be talking about the themes of Asakivar. And I used here an image of a khanda to symbolize the main theme of Asakivar. What does the Khanda symbolize in Sikh philosophy? Midi Pidi is more Kripans, but it has that idea too. Anybody?
Either a path or creation, destruction.
Creation is one idea. So in Bhagavad Gita, Guru Gobind Singh says, Khanda Pratme Sajke, in substance Sarupaya, right? That the Khanda, he equates Khanda with Akal Purkh Vaheguru, right? That the Khanda created the universe, Sanjeev?
Maybe the power of truth that cuts through falsehood.
Truth that cuts through falsehood. And Khanda is one blade, but it has two edges, right? So a lot of Sikh philosophers have this idea that the Khanda, as it's cutting down the enemy in the battlefield, we have to visualize it as cutting our own mind as well. So that it's a both literal weapon and a metaphorical weapon that destroys our own bottom, baleke, doubts, all those things internally while also destroying the enemy. And the Khanda is also a symbol ultimately of unity. It's oneness, right? And so that is really the theme of Bani again and again, is oneness as opposed to duality. Do you guys want to, there's two chairs up here. Do you guys want to come up here? Hello? Hardeep Singh? Don't be shy. Are there any other chairs? Does anybody have any extra chairs? Maybe sit here? There's one over there. There's a couple over there. Just see, I get out of bed. Come on. So, we're first going to talk about what we mean by the word duality and where the idea, right here in the front, where duality comes from. So duality literally means when there's a separation between two things. And Sikhi is about ekta. And you'll see again and again in Bani that there is a distinction made between ekta and duality in Bani. And here we see Guru Nanak Sahib Ji Bhai Mardana traveling to Mount Kailash to speak with the Siddhs. Siddhs are just a fancy name for yogis. Siddhs are yogis that have really spent a lot of time and are now elevated, are considered like super yogis, okay? So these Siddhs would be on this mountain where they would literally do horrible stuff to their body. And there's still Siddhs like this today. You guys can search later, maybe she'll put his picture in. There's a guy in India who's famous for not having put his arm down in 40 years. His arm looks just disgusting, by the way. It's just horrible. Nails, he can't move it anymore. He can't even put it down if he wants to now. So Guru Nanak Sahib Ji went to this mountain where these yogis would sit. It's a holy mountain for Hindus. Guru Ji found many of these Siddhs, some of them who were naked in the mountains, and you'll see that in India as well. People naked, or they'll mutilate their body in different ways. Some who had taken vows of silence, some who were torturing themselves in different ways. Because they felt that they needed to separate themselves from the world and also torture their bodies in order to connect with Vaheguru. That was their idea. So we are in India at the time of Guru Nanak Sahib Ji. There were two main traditions, which are still the two main traditions of the world today. There's the Semitic traditions, or what we call Abrahamic, and there's Vedic traditions. So Abrahamic comes from the word Abraham. Abraham is considered the first Jew and the first Muslim, okay? So Judaism, Christianity, and Islam all follow Abraham. They all have the same stories. All three of them believe in Moses. For example, what do Muslims call Moses? Musa, right? Muslims believe in Jesus as well. They call him Isa, right? Which is why we call him Isaiah, right? So they all share a lot of, even though they're killing each other all the time, they're pretty much the same religion actually, when it comes to philosophically and their worldview. So that's the Semitic tradition. So when Guruji talks in Guru Granth Sahib Ji about Kitab, Kitab means books. Guruji is talking about the Semitic books, because they're people who worship scripture. So they have the Old Testament, or the Torah. They have, or the Tanakh, sorry. They have the New Testament, which is a Christian Bible. And then they have the Quran, which is a Muslim, right? So those are the three main books. In the Christian worldview, they visualize God as literally a man. As this grandpa guy up in the sky, right? And human beings were created, what? In the image of? God. Okay? This is Orthodox Christian or Muslim or Jewish belief. Of course, there's liberal-minded ones that don't believe it, but this is what the scripture says, okay? So God here created the world, okay? And God is separate from the world. So God is up here looking down on the world, and you pray up to God. And your goal in life is to do what? You lead a good life so you can go where after you die? Go to heaven. Okay? So that's the Muslim and Christian belief. You lead a good life, after you die, you go to heaven. Because God is separate from the creation. God sent himself down to creation in the Christian tradition. Who did he send himself down as? Jesus. But Jesus is the only one who's God. No one else is God. So Jesus is God himself, and he came down as a human. Okay? So God created the world and is separate from it. And so this duality between good and evil, between creation and creator, that's really the heart of all Christian Western traditions. Okay? I'll move over here, maybe some people can't see me. Can you guys still see the screen? So Vedic is, Buddhist and what we call Orthodox Hinduism. Because if you study Hinduism, there's lots of different types of Hinduism. There's some schools of yogis, for example, they don't believe in God, they're atheists. So there's many different types of, there's 60 different schools of yoga tradition, and that's just one part of Hinduism. There's people who worship Ram or Vishnu or Shiva worshippers, there's people who worship Kali Ma, right? So there's many, many different types of Hindus. It's very hard to define Hindus. But one basic definition for all Hindus is A, respect for cow, though South Indians don't always have that. B is belief in caste system. And 3 is belief in reincarnation. And 4 is the idea that this world is Maya. So in the Hindu tradition, this world that we live in is an illusion. It's Maya. That's where the word Maya comes from. This world is fake. And because this world is fake, what do we have to do to connect with God? We need to leave this world. We need to leave society. We don't have kids. Don't be married because that's Maya, that's attachment. Don't have families. Don't have jobs. Go into jungles. Go into mountains. That's the only way. When you separate yourself from the world, that's the only way you can connect to God. That's the Hindu and Vedic tradition, which is why they have yogis, sannyasis, and the Buddhists have nuns and monks, right? So the Dalai Lama in Tibet, is he married? No, he doesn't get married, right? So Buddhist monks don't get married, nuns don't get married. So this is a famous painting, not a famous painting, it's a famous story of Buddha's life, where when he was doing meditation, a demon came. You can't see it too clearly, but the demon came with all these different forms that tried to attack him. So it came as a beautiful woman dancing in front of him, and all this gold and wealth, and they shot arrows at him, and his power of meditation blocked it. And the idea was that Buddha had to separate himself in the jungle from the rest of the world because Maya was trying to attack him. Literally, they kind of took the metaphor and made it into a real story. That Maya was a demon that came to attack Buddha. So that is, the Christian idea is the world is divided between good and evil, creator and creation. The Hindu idea is that the world is divided between Maya and reality. And reality is something you can only find when you separate yourself from the world. Guru Nanak Sahib's idea is very different. Guru Nanak Sahib Ji starts with what? What's the very first word of Guru Granth Sahib Ji? Ik Onkar, Ik, right? So that's where we begin from. We begin from Ik. And everything else comes from that. So our first section here, that maybe we'll get through this one and then we'll do the second and third one in the afternoon session, is beyond duality of thought, so thinking. So how do we break out of dualistic thinking? How do we get unity in our mind, in our thought process? Does anybody have any questions so far? So in the Hindu tradition, the world is fake. But right at the beginning of Asakivar, what does Guru Nanak Sahib Ji tell us about this world? So I'm going to ask on different people to read the Bani. So could I get somebody, one of the Benjis, to volunteer? If you don't volunteer, I'm going to have to ask somebody then. That's just... Ben, Auntie, you already did it, so you don't get to volunteer.
Anytime.
One of you back there, when you do it, please? And the rear? Okay, yeah. Go ahead, Benji. Yep. No, you don't have to stand up. Just read the... So Sach or Sat, what does Sat mean? What does Sach mean? True. What does it mean to be true? We say Satnam. What does that mean? So Guru Guru Nanak Sahib Ji says that truth is something that doesn't ever stop being true. So true essentially means that something is akal. It's infinite. It can never ever be destroyed or finished. That's what truth is. So we know that all these things, Khand, Brahman, the universe, planets, all these things are going to be destroyed. So why is Guru Nanak Sahib Ji calling these things true? What makes them true? So let's go to the next point. Somebody here can read this Shabad? Singh? Somebody? Please sing. So, what does this word mean? Kotri? Sorry? House or place where you reside, right? So, this jag, right? This world is the residence of truth. So this is a complete rejection of all of Hindu and Buddhist philosophy. Right there, Guru Nanak Sahib Ji rejected that idea. He said, stop thinking about this world as fake. This world is real. Why is this world real? Because the true one lives within it. That's what makes it real. What makes it real is that Akal Purkh Vaheguru is in creation. So whereas in every other world tradition, the creator, actually not every world, that's unfair. The First Nations and other what we might call pagan religions. So this is interesting. Christians and Muslims, when they went to these other places where people believed in respecting nature and respecting the environment, they considered them backward and stupid. Whereas from a Sikh perspective, their understanding was actually deeper. Because instead of dividing the world between God up there and the world down here, the Sikh idea is that Vaheguru Sahib Ji existed before creation, right? But Vaheguru Sahib Ji also exists within creation. So this is a very difficult thing. You can't understand it up here. You have to feel it. But the idea is that when Vaheguru Sahib Ji created the material world, which is Samsara, right, in Bhagavad Gita, Vaheguru Sahib Ji immersed themselves within creation. So that everywhere, everything around us is Ik Om God. The Vasya Hoya, Ramya Hoya, Vaheguru Sahib Ji, in all of creation. So that's why creation is true. Can you see Japnam in there? I thought he deserves some credit once in a while. We make fun of him at every camp. So this is why Seva, doing Seva is important. Seva is important because this world matters. If this world didn't matter, then there'd be no point in the Gurus fighting for people's rights. There'd be no point in making langars. There'd be no point in making Amritsar and creating places for people to do business and have work and make a life for themselves, right? So this world matters because Vaheguru Sahib Ji resides in it. This world matters because everyone is a Jyot of Vaheguru. And we need to respect that. Everyone has a sovereignty inside of them. So it's our duty to uphold that. And the only thing that really matters in this life are your actions. So it doesn't matter where you were born, what you look like, how rich you are, how poor you are. What matters is how you treat other people. Those are the things that you're judged by, right? And the judgment is very severe, Asakivar tells us. That when you do negative actions, the consequences for it are very severe. But when you do positive actions, the consequences are amazing. Because Kita apo apna ape hi lekha sandiye. That what you do yourself, you are going to face the consequences. So you won't face the consequences of what your father did, or what your grandmother did, or what your sister or brother does. But what you do in your life, you need to take responsibility for that. And you will be called to account based on your own actions. So that's something that we all need to take to heart. Because especially when we're younger, we think we're going to live forever. We can do good things when we get older, right? But doing good is not about making deals. Doing good is about developing mindset. And we'll talk about that in a while. So, why is a Christian going to do good things? And I'm not doubting that Christians are really good. They do a lot of seva on the world, for example. But what is the end goal of a Christian's seva? To go to heaven. And to avoid what? Actually, let's use this picture instead. I forgot to get rid of that one. This one looks scarier, okay? So these are the type of paintings that Christians grew up with, or stories. So we can see on the side here is heaven. So the priests get to be at the top even in heaven. Here are the regular people. And here are demons torturing people like crazy, and here's like horrible stuff happening in hell, okay? So, if you do bad things, what happens? You go to hell, and how long are you in hell for? Eternity. There is no forgiveness. So someone like Sajjan Tug, for example, would they go to heaven or hell? They go to hell. But when Sajjan Tug met Guru Nanak Sahib, even though he had done such horrible stuff, he was able to be transformed. So in Sikhi, there's no infinite, there's no like finite. It doesn't say, okay, you're a bad guy, that's it, you're done. It's done. You're going to hell forever. In fact, it's the opposite. Again and again, we have stories like the Jali Mukte, right? People who even rejected Guruji to their face were still forgiven. Because the Guru Sahib's ultimate nature is what? Is Bakshanha. It's forgiving, right? The Guruji is compassionate. So anyways, back to this. It's fear of punishment and expectation of reward. That is the culture that we live in. So we have taken on this as well. So in Islamic and Christian culture especially, it's fear of going to hell and expectation of going to heaven that people do actions. That's why people want to do good things, but people want to avoid bad things. In the Hindu tradition, what is it that why people do good things? So they can go from here, right, which is a Shuddha, right, to then go to come on guys, you guys know the castes? What's the next one? Vesh, and then? Khatri, right? Kshatri, and then? Brahman, right? Are there any women in this? Where are women in this cycle? So they're down here. So a woman has to be a really good wife to her husband and be a good daughter, and then what does she get to be born as? If she's a really, really good wife that listens to her husband and considers him Pati Parmeswar as the Lord, she gets to be born as what? Shuddha, as the lowest. Okay? So the lowest man is still higher than a woman, than the highest woman. Which is why the Sati tradition came up. Because once a woman is a man's property when she gets married, if the husband dies, then the woman is worthless. Because she literally has no worth to herself. Which is why then she would be killed on the funeral pyre. So this is a Hindu tradition. This is where the idea of karma and reincarnation comes from. In the Hindu tradition, the caste system has lasted for how long? Does anyone know? How long was American slavery system around for? About 200, 250 years, okay? The caste system has lasted about 5,000 to 6,000 years. It's the longest slave system in the world. And it's got a perfect way of working. What's the only way out of the caste system? What do you have to be to move up? You have to follow your dharma. What does dharma mean in Hindu tradition? It means you have to follow the rules of your caste. So if you're a Shuddha, you have to be a very, very good Shuddha, right? You have to listen to Brahmins, you have to respect them, you have to do all the dirty, disgusting work. And if you're really good and you never cause problems, you never speak up, you never go against the order, then in your next life, never in this life, you get rewarded. So it's a perfect system. So this is a problem with rewards after life, after death. Because what does that create? That allows for rich people to create systems, or powerful people, where the poor or the oppressed are always kept on the bottom. Because they're told what? If you do a good job, next life you'll be rewarded. So anybody who dares to speak up in this system, they're told they will go further down the chain, because there's always someone lower. Lower than Shuddha or Dalit, right? Or the untouchables. So there's even always someone lower, so if you speak up, you're going to get lower on the system. If you're good, you'll go higher. That's the beauty of the caste system. So in the caste system, your actions are judged by your caste rules. So when Krishna gives Arjun advice, who here has read Mahabharata? Or watched the video? When Arjun doesn't want to fight and kill the guy, I forgot who he's going to kill, because he thought it would be unfair.
The Kauravas.
What?
The Kauravas, his
Well,
own cousins.
yes, and what does Krishna tell him?
The Krishna tells him that they may be your cousins, but you are a Khatri.
Yeah.
So your dharma is to fight, so be the best Khatri you can
Yes.
and kill him.
So it doesn't matter if you're doing evil fighting, if you're fighting in a wrong battle, your job as a Khatri is to fight, you got to listen to your caste job. You have to listen to the Brahmin, you got to fight. That is the Hindu mentality. Which is why India has been taken over so many times. Because when you have no allegiance to your country then, you have allegiance only to your caste. So the very first Muslim invaders into India invaded in Bengal. They took over a kingdom in Bengal. Does anyone know how many soldiers they used to take over the very first Muslim kingdom in the 1200s in India? Anyone want to guess how big the Muslim army was? 30 people, 30 soldiers. They took over a whole kingdom because all they had to do was sneak into the kingdom and make a deal with who? Who always stays in power, doesn't matter who's in charge. British, Mughal, whoever. You make a deal with the Brahmins. And it doesn't matter, you screw up, they'll sell out their whole country, it doesn't matter, right? So this is the issue with India. Everything is divided by caste. There's no national identity, there's no social identity, nobody cares about the population. People don't care if someone is living in Gun or treated horribly, has no food to eat, because why is that person in that situation? Why? They deserve it, it's their caste. They did bad actions, they're in that state. If they're good in this life and they work hard, they'll get rewarded in the next life. It's not our job to fix our life now. That's why India doesn't get better. What does Guru Nanak Sahib say about the afterlife? Can somebody read this slok, please? Benji? So Jana Karta. So this Shabad is pretty famous, we know about it, it comes up in Asakivad. Guru Nanak Sahib is making essentially a joke here, that the mitti of the Muslim's grave, what do Muslims believe happens after you die? You're resurrected when Jesus will come back and he'll raise up the dead. Okay, so Muslims also believe Jesus is coming back. And Jesus will come back and he'll raise up the dead and there'll be a kingdom on earth of heaven and whatever. So that's why they bury their dead, because they believe that the bodies will come back. But what actually happens to bodies in the ground? They decay, they turn into what? They turn into really good dirt, which it can be used as clay. So people who make clay pots come by, and where do they like to dig up dirt from? From graves. And what do you do with a clay pot? You guys remember in school, what do you do after you make it? Can you eat out of it right away after you made it? You have to bake it in an oven, right? In a kiln, right? So Muslims are deadly afraid of fire, because they believe that if you get burned, that means that you won't be able to be resurrected when Muhammad comes back. Okay? Or, sorry, Jesus comes back. So they have this idea, we're not going to be saying, the dirt from the Muslim grave, and the Muslim is then crying out while he's being baked alive, right? We're just trying to say, like, this is ridiculous, this belief, that the body still has anything when it's turned into mitti. And Guruji's end line is, so jane kartar, that only Akal Purkh Vaheguru can know what happens. The emphasis in Sikhi is not after this life. It is what does Guru Ramdas Ji say in the Chansam Guru of Asakivad? Jivana Mokat Soakhiye, Mar Jive Mariya. So when do you need to die? Do you die? Is it a physical death that you need to have in Sikhi? It's a death of your conscience, of your ego. So you die in your ego and you get Jivan Mukti. That's the amazing thing about Sikhi. So it's the only religion where Mukti happens not after you die you get saved, you go higher and higher, and then you get Mukti when you're a Brahmin, or you're really good and you go to heaven after you die. In Sikhi, heaven is something that you can be in this life right now. It's when you're connected on the level of Vaheguru. So in this world, unlike everything, unlike the other traditions, in Sikhi we know the truth, and the truth is that everything is ek oankar, that the Creator is truth, and that therefore everything that the Creator makes is true, creation is truth, and so everything in this world is truth. There is no distinction between good or bad. Is there a devil in Sikhi? Is there any opposing force? Vaheguru is Nid, Ved, and is Vaheguru afraid of anything? Vaheguru is Nid, Bol, right? So Vaheguru has no fear because Vaheguru is everything. What's Vaheguru going to be afraid of, right? Vaheguru has no enemies because nothing can be as powerful as Vaheguru, because Vaheguru is everything. So then, in Bani, we do see, especially in Asakivar, because it's what we're talking about here, is the idea of Kur comes up a lot. Kur means, or duality, deception. Okay? Could somebody read this Shabad, please?
ਕੂੜ ਮਿੱਠਾ ਕੂੜ ਮਾਖਿਓ ਕੂੜ ਡੋਬੇ ਫੂਲ ਨਾਨਕ ਬਖਾਣੇ ਬੇਨਤੀ ਤੁ ਦਵਾਜ ਪੂਰੋ ਪੂਰ
We all know what Mitta means, right? So this is the nice thing, is that gur, or things that separate us from Vaheguru, actually seem awesome. You know? That's why it's so hard. Is there really two opposing forces in Bani? It's not two opposing forces, it's our own mindset. We separate ourselves from Vaheguru by falling under the spell of deception. So we stop seeing unity and we start seeing duality in the world. And we start seeing duality in the world because we stop recognizing that Vaheguru is everywhere. And so if we really felt that Vaheguru was everywhere, if we really knew Vaheguru was everywhere, how would we treat other people? How would we do seva for other people? How would we do our business? How would we do our jobs, right? If we really felt that Vaheguru was everywhere, if we really felt that Vaheguru was within us all the time, how would we conduct our lives? What would we do with our time? What would we spend our time doing? So that's the thing, is that when you are connected to Vaheguru, then you see Vaheguru everywhere, then there's no duality. But we're in a state of mind where we are separated from Vaheguru because of our own mindset. So I'm asking, how much time do we have? Okay, we're going to stop soon because it's too long to talk for this long, and you guys, I know, start zoning out as well. I really appreciate everybody paying attention so well. So falsehood is our own perception, because nothing can exist outside of Vaheguru. So somebody could read this Shabad, please? Come on. Every time it's going to be a challenge then.
ਸੱਚ ਤਾਂ ਪਰ ਜਾਣੀਏ ਜੇ ਹਿਰਦੇ ਸੱਚਾ ਹੋਏ ਕੂੜ ਕੀ ਮਨ ਉਤਰੈ ਤਨ ਕਰੇ ਹੱਛਾ ਹੋਏ
How do we get the mail of gur off of us? Sach ta par janiye ja hride sacha hoye. We can only get the gur off of us when we grab onto the Sach. And when that is within our hirda. So when we develop truth inside of us, then we can get gur out of us. So you don't get rid of gur by doing, the whole, we see in Bani again, is doing rituals. And we're going to talk about that later. Because we now do a lot of rituals that we think are going to make ourselves pure as well. And rituals and symbols have importance, but they're not the end goal. They need to be ways of developing a Sikhi mindset. So don't become immersed in the ritual. Think about what the ritual is trying to teach you. So anything without thoughtfulness is a waste. That is the only time that your body really becomes clean. So, and this will be a topic that we'll talk about later, and I'm sure Gurminder Kaur will also be talking about this tomorrow, is the idea of impurity and purity. And this is a standard idea that Guru Nanak Sahib Ji talks about a lot. And we really also divide the world up into pure and impure things. And Guru Nanak Sahib Ji's definition of what's pure and what's impure is very revolutionary and very unique. In the end though, all of these things, changing your perception, getting rid of gur, it can only happen through a connection with your Santbir. So these are not things that we can do on our own. That's the first mistake we make. So in anything in life, when we think that we're doing it ourselves, we've already lost. The Sikh tradition has always been, before everything, what did Sikhs used to do? Everything, go to school, start their day at work. What would they do first in the morning? They would do ardas. And after the test was over, after they had a successful day at work, whatever happened, or even if it wasn't successful, what would they do at the end of the day? They would do ardas, they would thank Guruji for the day that they had. That's a Sikh tradition. That everything that we get in this life is a gift from Guru. So all of these things, the change of perception that we need to have in our life, to stop seeing things as duality, it can only happen by developing a relationship with Guru Nanak Sahib Ji, with Guru Granth Sahib Ji. Satguru Jevar Datta ko nahi, sab suniye lok sabaya, Satguru miliye sach paya, jinhi vicho aap gavaya, jin sacho sach bujaya, jin sacho sach bujaya. Guruji is really, like we can imagine Guruji is shouting this out to us, Guru Nanak Sahib Ji, in the fourth body of Asakivat. He's saying to us, there is nothing more beautiful, more amazing than the Satguru. And those people who have met the Satguru, they have recognized that they are really a part of Vaheguru. They have lost their ego, and they have now revealed Vaheguru inside of them. It's an incredible idea. That by meeting the Guru, you are internally revealed. Your true nature is revealed, just like Asraja, right? He was living as a slave in that other town, but his true nature was that he was a king. So we also need to think in that mentality, that our true nature is not what we are. So in Christianity, for example, your true nature is what?
Evil.
Evil. You're sinful. Because Adam and Eve ate the apple, right? And how are you cured of your sin? By submitting to Jesus, okay? And in Hinduism, your true nature is that the world is false, you need to remove yourself from it. Sikhi, the true nature is a beautiful, loving one. It's not negative. The true nature of yourself is that you are love and you are Vaheguru. And everything around you is Vaheguru. And you just need to feel that. So your true nature is not wrong. Your true nature is beautiful. You need to connect to your true nature. And get rid of all the garbage that you put on it. And the only thing that can do that is the Guru. That's the only thing that can give us that wisdom. So this is not something that we can do through our own effort, though our own effort is important. It has to come through Kirpa. And Kirpa is achieved by developing a relationship with the Guru. So, people ask sometimes, Kirpa seems unfair that some people get Kirpa and some people don't. But that's not a good way to think about Kirpa. The nicer way to think about Kirpa is this. We can think about Kirpa like rain coming down. The Vaheguru Sahib is giving us Kirpa all the time. It's whether we have our bowl ready to receive that Kirpa of Vaheguru. And what's the metaphor that Bani uses? If your bowl is full of gand, right? And it's not clean, it's not empty. If it's full of ego and kam, krodh, lobha, ankar, even if you get Kirpa, you're not going to be able to do anything with it. So you need to clean yourself out. You need to make yourself ready, and then the Kirpa will be there. So a lot of people spend time like, oh, well, how do we get Kirpa? We're looking at the end result instead of going on the first step. We're looking at it backwards. What we need to be doing is saying, how can I develop myself so that I can feel Vaheguru's Kirpa, so I can feel Guruji's Kirpa? Because the Guru is always there loving you. The Guru will be there even if you fight against him. Bende Khan led an army into battle against Guru Hargobind Sahib Ji. Like when we talk about evil, he led an army that killed Gursikhs to attack Sikhi. And Guru Hargobind Sahib Ji, as Bende Khan was dying, after Guru Hargobind Sahib Ji had to kill him himself, took Bende Khan into his lap and did Bach with him, and held him in his lap and stroked his head, like a father would for a child. So that is the love of Guru, that even someone who would kill him and attack him, the Guru is still forgiving. So when we talk about Kirpa, the Kirpa is there, the Guru is ready to give it, we need to make ourselves ready. And so we do that by breaking away from duality. Okay? So we're going to be going on to two other topics in our afternoon lecture. We're going to end off on this right here. The main points to take away from the beginning 40s of Asakiva are that there's no separation between physical and spiritual world. There's no spirit world. This is an Avatar reference. Okay. There's no spirit world or a physical world in Sikhi. The spirit world is here within us. We just need to connect to it. You strive for achieving connection with Vaheguru in this life, not outside of it. Vaheguru is not something that you wait to do. Vaheguru is something you do right now. Okay? You don't do good actions because of fear or because of expectation of reward. You do good actions because Vaheguru is love and you want to treat everything with love. So when you're in love with someone, you do crazy things for them, right? So if you have a crush on somebody or you like somebody, people do silly things. You get to see in movies. People do ridiculous things when they like someone. When you're really in love with true love, which is what love of Guru is, then you would want to do crazy things for them. Then getting shaheed for your Guru is not a big deal. It's just a simple act of love, right? So that's the mentality that Sikhs develop. And we can only realize all of this through a connection with the Guru. The Guru is the one who teaches us this. Okay? So we'll end up there. Now please, I talked a lot about a lot of different topics. And it only works if we have a little bit of a discussion. So if anyone, just a couple of questions so I don't look silly up here. Anju?
One thing, you talked about the reality and truth of creation.
Anju.
But one thing that came to mind is, I know we Bhai this book, it says Jagara Jana Sabji.
Yeah.
How do you reconcile?
How do you so good thing about the subject Bani, you see that a lot actually. And you see it in Jaysari Kivad as well, Jaysari, his Bani and Jaysari, Jadamanti as well. He has similar shabads to that. So that's not a contradiction. You have to understand that the metaphor, what is the overall message that Guru Tegh Bahadur is trying to give you? So Guru Tegh Bahadur really speaks from this place of, how can I put it? If you read Guru Tegh Bahadur's Bani and you study for a while, it's sort of like, please stop wasting your life. Please stop wasting your time. Because he's someone who was in that place where he had to work hard to develop a connection with the Bhai Guru, right? And we know that from Sikh history, right? And so he comes from a place like, stop being immersed in this. So that's the idea. But if you look at, and I'll give you a shabad that my knowledge of Bani isn't great, but I'll give you a shabad afterwards which explains this idea very well. Where Guruji says, this world all around us is false. And what he means is false is because we become attached to it, instead of becoming attached to the Vaheguru that is underlying it all. So it's the same idea. Once you're attached to the falsehood within it, once you're attached, to the external things, once you're in love with things that are going to disappear, once you become lustful for things that will not be there forever, once you become angry because your ego is bruised, then you're becoming detached from Vaheguru, then everything around you is false. So falsehood is a state of mind. And what we can see from Guru Tegh Bahadur's own life, and this is why the lives of the Gurus are very important as well, is that he really believed in the worth of this life, of this world, right? Because otherwise he wouldn't have died for those Hindus, right? If you come in from a Hindu perspective where this world is false, then it wouldn't have mattered what happened to those Hindus. There's no need to fight for them, because it was their own karma that got them in that situation, right? And whatever happens, happens, and that's fine, it's not up to us, we just sit back and do Bhat and Simran at home, right? But that's not the Sikh perspective. The Sikh perspective is, you do your Bhat and your Simran, you make it a part of your life so that you can be inspired to go out and change the world in a positive way. So the world is false, and you'll see that in Barney a lot, but the world is false because of our perception of it, not because of what it really is. So remember, always relate everything back to Ik Onkar. That's the key. A lot of people talk about Guru Granth Sahib Ji being really an explanation of Ik Onkar, right? So, any other questions or comments? Hanji.
I have a question about karma and karma in this context. So what would you say about that?
So that's a very big topic. You know, karma comes up a lot in Bani. There's no doubt that karma is an important idea within Sikhi. But there's a couple of key ideas that we need to think about when we think about karma and the way it works in Sikhi. The first is that when you come to the Guru, all your past karma are wiped out. So that should be our mentality. Instead of worrying about what our past karma are or why we're in the situation we're in, and we can't doubt it. Our lives here, for example, are better than 98% of the world. You know, you might have seen that like meme that went around. You know, where it's like it talked about like how many percent of the world isn't able to read, or how many percent of the world doesn't have like a full meal every day. Like we here living today, where we have food, clothes, we live better than most of the people in the world. So we can say that whatever happened, we somehow got a much better life than most of the world, right? And that could be because of past lives, it could be because of karma, we don't know why that is, but we've been given a special opportunity. So everyone in the world is given different opportunities, it's what you make of it, that's the first thing. The secondly, in Bani, what karma really refers to is whether you are close or far from Guruji. So there's no point, when we think of karma, we think of a very Punjabi sense that any of the karma are bad because, for example, they're handicapped, or because they don't have a good house, or because their family has a lot of problems. That's what we consider bad karma or good karma. But from that perspective, the Guru Sahibs had bad karma, right? Their families were destroyed. Guru Gobind Singh Ji lost everything. He had no material possessions. His sons were all killed. So from a Punjabi perspective, the Gurus have bad karma, but we would never say that, right? What karma really is, in Sikhi perspective, and let's think of Guru Gobind Singh Ji's Bani, Mitr Pyari Nu, right? What does Guru Sahib Ji really want? He wants just to be in connection with Vaheguru. So that's what karma is. If your karma can bring you close to Vaheguru, then you have good karma. If your karma are keeping you away from Vaheguru, then you have bad karma. So we think about karma in a very simplistic way. We would say Bhai Lallo has bad karma. He doesn't have enough money to have a bed. He can't even feed Guru Nanak Sahib Ji properly. But from Guru Nanak Sahib Ji's perspective, Bhai Lallo's karma are so great that his name is mentioned in Guru Granth Sahib Ji, right? So what could be a bigger honor than that? So when we think about karma, we should think about you do need to be very aware of your actions, and you should be afraid of your actions. That's something that does come up in Bani. You should be very conscious of how you treat people and what your place is in this world. Because the negative things that you do in this life will come back. Either they'll come back now or future life, however you want to look at it, but they will come back to haunt you. So Bani is very clear about that. So negative actions will always be rewarded with negative things, right? And Bani tells us again and again that if you sow poison, you're going to reap poison, right? So don't sow poison, don't plant poison, plant good deeds. That's the first thing. So regardless of what your past karma is, make your karma from now on good. And remember that when you come to the Guru can wash away all your karma. So you can go from being a thief like by Bidhi Chand and being Guru Hargobind Sahib Ji's, greatest warrior and the general of the Sikh army, So, any other questions or comments? Hanji ji.
So like you told about the differences in the religions, Hinduism and
Hanji.
so like we in the social circle we have friends who are like Hindus. So is it like good to keep quiet all the times and just pass time, or like what do you think is the best?
That's a very interesting point. The Gurus also have friends from people of other religions. So we need to look at that, right? In fact, some of the Guru's closest friends were Muslims historically, right? Like Sai Mian Mir or Pir Buddha Shah. Well, they weren't really Orthodox Muslims, they were Sufis, but still. Guruji doesn't want us to be living closed off lives just interacting with other Sikhs, right? Then Sikhi wouldn't grow either, and we wouldn't learn new things. We need to know about the world, we need to be interacting with people. So I think that we should always be respectful when we speak to other people. If someone asks you about Sikhi, don't be ashamed of what the Sikh perspective is. Be honest about it. And look at how the Gurus would teach people. The Gurus wouldn't go and tell people you're stupid for believing this. So if someone is interested and they start a dialogue, you can talk with them and say, okay, no, the Sikh perspective is this, and this is what we believe. And there's a nice and kind way to say it. And out of love, you can actually give people a lot of, people can gain a lot of understanding from them. Of course, if we're not living Sikh lives ourselves, it's pretty hypocritical to be preaching to other people. That's a big problem that we all do, right? So we like to lecture other people, but our own selves we're a mess, right? Which is why it's a disaster that I'm up here teaching you guys about this stuff. So that's a real issue as well, right? But I think that when you're talking to other people, we have to be careful. I'm not comfortable usually talking about other religions that much because we don't want to develop homemade within us. Bhai Gurdas Ji says that Isaiya Musaya homemade hiranme, that Jews and Christians have homemade within them and they are lost. And the homemade that they have is that they believe they're the only way to God, right? So we have to be careful that we don't get into that thinking, that we start believing we're the only way to Vaheguru, because then we are just as lost as they are. The other thing is that when you speak to other people, always speak respectfully, because they also have truth in their stories, right? So Akal Ustat Guru Gobind Singh Ji tells us that all over the world, China, Manchuria, Africa, Europe, everyone is worshipping Vaheguru in the way that they know. And Guruji doesn't say that they're all wrong and we're right. He says they're all worshipping Vaheguru like they know how to worship Vaheguru, and that's fine. So we know that Sikhi is a straight path, it's a true path, it's the easiest path. But that doesn't mean that other paths are not a path to Vaheguru. So, it doesn't mean that Buddha was not an inspired soul. I mean, the guy realized and achieved many great things. But from a Sikh perspective, leaving your family, leaving your life, not being married, going off to a jungle for years, torturing yourself by starving yourself to meet Vaheguru is counterproductive. The Sikh perspective is have a life, have friends, have a family. You know, have a job, do all those things. You can meet Vaheguru in normal everyday activities. That's a Sikh idea. Any other questions, or should we wrap it up? So thank you very much. I apologize for any mistakes, all the mistakes I made. And Japnam Singh has something to say, but Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji